In our top story, the Johannesburg Magistrates Court has made an order to deport undocumented foreign nationals that were amongst people arrested in police raids in the city centre last week.
Those who failed to prove that they are in the country legally will be deported within the next 30 days. In the meantime, they'll be detained at the Lindela Repatriation Centre in Krugersdorp West of Johannesburg.
More than 300 people who were arrested during the raids are currently appearing individually before 5 magistrates. The 7 police officers who were also arrested on Wednesday for allegedly trying to resell confiscated counterfeit goods to traders are also expected to appear in court this afternoon.
More than 600 people were arrested last week for being in possession of counterfeit goods. Meanwhile, there's been a show of solidarity outside court.
Well, joining us via Skype to talk a little bit more about the implications of today's court order involving undocumented foreigners arrested during raids in Johannesburg is Gary Eisenberg, an immigration law expert in Cape Town. Thanks so much for joining us on the program, Gary. Good to talk to you again. Give us a sense of what this deportation order means, and then we'll start trying to unpack how do we get to that point.
I don't have the deportation order in front of me, but I suppose it's like any other. When an illegal foreigner or foreigner is apprehended in South Africa and found not to have any documentation confirming the lawful migration status in South Africa of such individual, a work visa, a so-called spousal visa, business visa, whatever it may be, permanent residence even, that person is deportable, in fact, must be deported. So these individuals that have been apprehended on these raids, I believe approximately 600, some of them have, I understand, specious or fake temporary residence visas. That's, by the way, a criminal offence and can be prosecuted. And others have no documents at all and therefore stand to be deported immediately, arrested, incarcerated, for purposes of deportation.
All right, so by and large, would these be people that have somehow found their way into the country, maybe not even going through the borders or perhaps being let through by corrupt officials?
Well, absolutely. It's common practice. We see it at our law firm on a weekly basis, sometimes on a daily basis, of individuals that have smuggled themselves through, especially Bait Bridge, by the way, the terribly corrupt border post. Others have come in other ways across the Mozambican border and so on. And their details have not been captured. They've never been issued with visas upon entry. And they remain in South Africa for long periods of time, either posing as refugee seekers with asylum seeker permits. Either they are specious permits or they're the real thing, waiting for their applications to be adjudicated by the refugee authority, or they live in South Africa without any documentation whatsoever and continue living. They marry, they have children, they carry on businesses, they work, they live so-called ordinary lives as legal ghosts. And that's what we see today in Johannesburg.
How is it possible, though? Because at some point you have to interact with the system, whether it's opening a bank account, whether it's going to a hospital. You've got to produce some kind of paperwork to somebody at some point. Is it possible to live in the country and be completely off the grid?
It absolutely is. I wouldn't say easy, but we know of people that have passed through our own doors that have lived in South Africa as legal ghosts for many years. They've used other bank accounts, or their own banks have turned a blind eye, or they've opened bank accounts through third-party businesses. There are ways and means of doing it by hook or by crook. And if economic migrants, especially from foreign countries who are desperate for a better living and for perhaps a safer environment than war-torn places abroad, they'd go to any length to make their stay livable, not necessarily easy, for years and years, undetected.
So some of them we know have ended up as traders, and that perhaps protects them a little bit. But I would also imagine, particularly in the service industries, we see a lot of undocumented people or not properly documented people being employed. And I wonder if these employers know what to ask for and know what is legal.
As in any country, it probably takes education. Our Immigration Act is replete with provisions which criminalize the employment of illegal foreigners, which criminalize harshly employers that aid and abet illegal foreigners or foreigners without proper documents. And employers are unaware of this. At the same time, I must say that because South Africa, in proportion to its population, has such a great pool of undocumented aliens, or foreigners as they are called in terms of the Immigration Act, or people with specious or fraudulent visas, which are extremely easy to obtain these days, that the Department of Home Affairs doesn't spend more time educating the public about a human rights environment of employing foreigners and making remedial measures workable. So if a foreigner is undocumented or illegal in South Africa and seeks to regularize their status, our government makes so terribly difficult for them to do so, even on a voluntary basis, that these remedial measures do not work efficiently enough to encourage undocumented foreigners from coming clean. And that's been our problem all along.
All right, so there are genuine cases of people who are fleeing their countries for one reason or another, persecution, and are asylum seekers. But there are rules in terms of as soon as you arrive, you need to report yourself somewhere within a certain period of time. Take us through that process.
Well, absolutely correct. We have a refugee seeker a visa, which a person, as you quite rightly said, must obtain it upon entry. And the refugee reception centres are close to our borders. That's really what an asylum seeker should be doing. Now, most of our so-called refugee population in South Africa are not refugees at all, but rather economic migrants. And South Africa is belaboured under a volume of economic migrants that have kind of overpopulated the refugee reception system, making it incapable of operating efficiently. So really, we have a highly regulated refugee system, we have a highly regulated immigration system, but neither system works well because we have too few trained governmental employees pulling the levers. It has to work both ways. So if government wants a country free of undocumented foreigners and foreigners with fake visas or people posing as refugees but rather are economic migrants, they have to be more educated themselves. And they have to create mechanisms in this country that really work efficiently, not only to aid the national interest of South Africa, but also to aid foreigners who are just trying to do the right thing.
The Africa Diaspora Forum says that you will not be able to manage the undocumented migrant story in the country until you deal with corruption within the system. Do you have a sense of just how big the problem might be in terms of a corrupt system?
Well, I don't think anybody has an idea. With regard to the number of undocumented foreigners, I once asked this a number of years ago. I believe that at least 10% of South Africa's total population are undocumented foreigners or foreigners who have imposed themselves on our population register by pretending that they are South African citizens by birth. Now, this is something that the Department of Home Affairs wants to deny, or rather to undermine by sort of recalculating these figures. But I think that's more or less the true figure, from 10% to 15%. Number two, with regards to corruption in the Department of Home Affairs, it's unfathomable. I don't think the Department of Home Affairs itself understands the depth of it. And by corruption, I don't only mean officials who take bribes. I'm rather talking about corrupted officials who don't know what they are doing. The level of ignorance and the lack of intellectual acuity and training amongst the ranks and file of immigration and refugee reception officials is terribly high. Rather, the level of ignorance is terribly high. And this is the cause of the system not coping. That's my opinion, and it has been for the last 20 years, and things have not changed. I think they've gotten worse.
All right, and the reality is that these undocumented foreign nationals who will be deported within the next 30 days, given what we've seen in the past, they'll be back quite soon and continue as if nothing happened.
Well, if they are not coming back soon, these same individuals, others will take their place because of the nature of the world, because borders have become rather porous or are porous. When you're desperate enough, you'll find a way of crossing them into greener pastures. And that's what's been going on in every country, including the UK and the United States, with massively inflated undocumented foreigner figures as well. So it's not only a South African phenomenon, it's a worldwide phenomenon. So while we can mobilize our army at the border, we'll have exactly the same phenomenon perpetuating itself into the future.
All right. So in conclusion, perhaps it's a big question, and I don't know what the answers might be, but in your experience, what do you think can be done to try and document as many people as possible and have those people that should have a right to stay without fear?
That's $1 million question, and I have the $1 million answer, Peter. I must say that I've encouraged the South African government to adopt an amnesty, not only for weapons, but also for undocumented foreigners. If we have a number of million, let's say 2 or 3 million or 5 million, 5 million I would say is the proper number, 5 million undocumented foreigners or foreigners with fake visas or permanent residence permits or ID books, a moratorium should come into operation and an amnesty should be handed down where they have a window period in which to hand in their fake documents, to be fingerprinted, to become part of our system, to be properly documented, and to be given an opportunity, at least to legalize themselves. And as a country, we'll be cleaner for it, and we'll achieve the moral high ground once again.
All right, Gary, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very, very much indeed, as always, for your insights. That's Gary Eisenberg, who's immigration law expert, speaking to us via Skype from Cape Town.